Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Robert.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome.
In our top story, Israel is at war with Hezbollah. The IDF has pummeled the Iranian-backed militia and has destroyed much of the terror infrastructure it built in and under Lebanon over the last 20 years. Hundreds of terrorists have been eliminated in precision strikes, including many of Hezbollah's top leaders. The Lebanese guerrilla army began firing rockets into the Jewish state on October 8th, prompting the evacuation of more than 80,000 Israelis from their homes. Northern Israel has come under daily attacks from Lebanon for nearly a year. The terror group has amassed a massive stockpile of long-range rockets and precision-guided missiles that threaten the entire Jewish state. In a single day, the IDF struck over 1,600 targets inside of Lebanon, and Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant declared that last week was the worst in Hezbollah's history. Hundreds of Hezbollah members were taken out in precision strikes, and thousands of loaded missile launchers were destroyed on the ground in Lebanon. The Biden administration opposes an Israeli ground invasion of southern Lebanon and is pressing for a diplomatic solution to avoid what many are already calling the Third Lebanese War.
Jerusalem has confirmed that it has taken out senior commanders of the Hezbollah terrorist organization in a precision airstrike in Lebanon. The targeted attack came just days after the Hezbollah network was crippled by a sophisticated cyber attack on its communications equipment. Sources in Beirut have confirmed that Ibrahim Akil, the head of Hezbollah's military operations and one of America's most wanted terrorists, was killed. Over a dozen members of Hezbollah's elite Radwan force were eliminated in the attack. Akil was responsible for the 1983 bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, which killed 241 Americans. The IDF released a statement saying Akil and the other commanders killed were responsible for planning, advancing, and executing hundreds of terrorist operations against Israel. The top terror leaders were reportedly planning an October 7th-style infiltration on Jewish communities in the Galilee at the time of the strike.
Security chiefs and intelligence experts throughout the world have expressed their amazement at the recent operation that targeted Hezbollah terrorists through walkie-talkies and handheld pagers. John Spencer, the chair of urban warfare at West Point, said, "While there have been significant intelligence operations and surprise attacks throughout history, he has never seen one as precise, forceful, and geographically widespread as this." Spencer said, "I cannot find a similar intelligence or military operation with such secrecy, lethality, ingenuity, and audacity." He noted that the attack exposed the Hezbollah network not just in Lebanon, but in other parts of the Middle East where Hezbollah agents and affiliates carried the specific pager issued by the terror group.
Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has expressed her support for withholding weapons from Israel as the Jewish state fights for its very survival. In an interview with the National Association of Black Journalists, Harris said she supported President Joe Biden's decision to intentionally delay arms shipments to Israel. She said withholding the weapons had given the White House leverage over the Jewish state. Some have speculated that this delay caused the deaths of dozens of Israeli soldiers who were forced to enter buildings controlled by Hamas rather than bombing the buildings. Israel is fighting a multi-front war with a dwindling supply of weapons, and Harris is using the situation to appease her pro-Hamas constituents. Voters in the key states of Wisconsin and Michigan have threatened to abstain from casting ballots in the presidential election unless Harris demands a full ceasefire in Gaza and a change of weapons export policies to Israel.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has criticized International Criminal Court prosecutor Karim Khan for meeting with terror leaders while simultaneously seeking arrest warrants for Israelis. Netanyahu sarcastically said that Khan met with two great champions of human rights, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. He noted that Erdogan is renowned for slaughtering Kurdish civilians and jailing journalists, while Abbas denies the Holocaust and pays terrorists to murder Jews. Netanyahu said rather than issuing arrest warrants for war crimes against Erdogan and Abbas, Khan remains obsessed with portraying Israel's democratically elected leaders as war criminals.
The U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation has released a shocking report on the surge of anti-Semitism in America. The FBI published its statistics that show anti-Jewish hate crimes skyrocketed by 63% last year. That is an all-time high. The FBI said 1,832 anti-Semitic hate crimes were reported in 2023, but the actual number was likely much higher because many incidents go unreported. The Anti-Defamation League statistics reveal that 8,873 anti-Semitic incidents occurred last year. That's a rise of 140% from 2022. It added that anti-Semitic assaults in the United States increased by 45% last year.
Exiled Iranian Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has called on Israel to work with the Iranian opposition to overthrow the Ayatollah's radical Islamic regime. Speaking at the Israeli-American Council, Pahlavi said war is being waged on Israel from the north, the south, the east, and a propaganda war from the west. He said all of this is being coordinated, supported, and directed by Iran. The eldest son of the late Shah of Iran warned that the world is standing on the precipice of history and that now is the time to send the radical Shiite regime into the ash heaps. Pahlavi said that he speaks for the people of Iran who are fighting against the regime every day. He said they have sent me with the message that they are not only fighting to free themselves, but to free the Middle East and the world from the scourge of evil of the Iranian regime. The Crown Prince said that if Iranians and Israelis work together, they can secure prosperity and dignity for both people and expand from the Abraham Accords to the Cyrus Accords.
16 Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives joined their Republican counterparts by voting in favor of a resolution allowing products produced in Judea and Samaria to be labeled as Made in Israel. Former U.S. President Donald Trump legislated against the anti-Semitic boycott, divest, and sanction campaign, which called for items produced in the Jewish heartland to be labeled as Made in the Occupied Territories. The strong bipartisan support in Congress for the fair labeling of Israeli products sent a message to the Biden-Harris administration that despite the political divide, most American lawmakers oppose discrimination against Jews living in the biblical heartland. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has warned that the two-state solution is the stepping stone to the destruction of Israel. DeSantis spoke out against previous and current U.S. administrations that continue to support the notion of creating a Palestinian state within the borders of Israel. He said it is important for Americans to be very clear-eyed about what it means to be a strong ally of the State of Israel, and we should not embrace the canard of a two-state solution. DeSantis warned that the Palestinians are not seeking peace, but rather a stepping stone to the destruction of the Jewish state. He believes the current movement calling for a Palestinian state from the river to the sea is effectively calling for a second Holocaust.
A new initiative is encouraging Christians around the world to fight anti-Semitism and show support for the Jewish state by hanging a mezuzah. The Book of Deuteronomy commands the Jewish people to place the words of the Torah on their doorposts. The mezuzah holds the Hebrew scroll and identifies a Jewish household. Actress and co-founder of the October 7th Coalition, Patricia Heaton, said that she was outraged by the Jew hatred on college campuses after the October 7th attacks on Israel. She was particularly shocked by stories of vandalism of mezuzahs. In response, Heaton has launched the My Zuzah, Your Zuzah campaign, which encourages Christians to hang mezuzahs on their doors as a statement of solidarity with the Jewish people. The O7C is calling on Christians to record videos of their mezuzahs and post them online before October 7th.
The High Holy Days will begin this Wednesday evening at sundown, when Jews around the world will celebrate Rosh Hashanah, the start of the new year 5785. This is the beginning of the period known as the Days of Awe, commencing on the first day of the month of Tishrei, according to the Hebrew calendar. The central theme of the two-day Rosh Hashanah holiday is the recognition of God as King. It also begins the period of Tshuva, turning toward God and away from wrongdoing. The 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and the Day of Atonement, known as Yom Kippur, are reserved for repentance. Customary traditions on Rosh Hashanah include the sounding of the shofar, or ram's horn, 100 times, as well as the eating of symbolic foods, such as apples dipped in honey, to evoke a sweet new year.
We here at Israel Now News would like to wish all of our viewers a wonderful year of health, happiness, and peace.
Shana Tova. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. We're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Gidon Ariel. He's the CEO and co-founder of Root Source. Gidon, thanks for being on the show.
Always a pleasure.
Gidon, tell us a little about what is Root Source.
Root Source is a platform for pro-Israel Christians and Jews to engage with each other, primarily by studying the concepts, ideas, and texts that we have in common. We have about 20 Jewish teachers, all from Israel, and today we have about 15,000 Christians from all over the world who are studying together over 1,200 recorded lessons about the Jewish roots of Christianity.
It's very interesting. You're an Orthodox Jew, but you decided to go out and teach Christians. Why?
I'll tell you, it's a long story, but the bottom line is that I noticed that there were so many Christians who were interested in establishing a relationship with Jews, but so few Jews who were interested in establishing a relationship with Christians. And I felt that these Christians were extending a hand of friendship to me. And like I learned in kindergarten, if somebody wants to be your friend, then be your friend back. And this has been going on for me for about 20 years now. And it's just been friendship all the time. Friendship and study of the Jewish roots of Christianity.
But you go beyond just teaching the Jewish roots and what the Christians call the Old Testament, or what we would call the Tanakh.
That's right.
You actually talk about the roots of the New Testament as well.
That's absolutely right, because it really is the same thing. Because the Jewish roots of the New Testament, anybody who's read the New Testament sees that there's a quote of the Old Testament on virtually every page of the New Testament. And the fact is that the Bible, in the time of Jesus, was what is called the Old Testament. There was no New Testament in the time of Jesus. It only started being written decades and decades after his life. So what we have in Root Source is not only the Bible, not only things that we might talk about, how we talk about the New Testament, but we also talk about so much of Jewish wisdom. If it's Hebrew, introduction to biblical Hebrew, women in the Bible, the Jewish holidays, the text of, for example, Ethics of the Fathers, the Talmud, anything that our teachers are interested in studying, this is the stuff that Christians find out, wow, we've never heard about this, and it is so interesting. Because what Jews today study and have been studying for thousands of years, that's actually what Jesus studied when he was on the earth as well.
You mentioned that you have 15,000 students. How do you practically teach that amount of people?
At first, we thought that we would have live programs, live teachings. But then I realized, how am I going to be able to have my teachers be awake also for the students in the Philippines and also for the ones in Honolulu? So we therefore recorded lessons, and our teachers are encouraged, not only able, to engage with us via email, via WhatsApp messaging, via concepts and contacts on our website. And thank God, like I said, obviously not all 15,000 people engage with us. Our students often are a little bit hesitant to engage, but once they do, they realize it's the best thing that they could do.
Your partner is actually a Bible-believing Christian. How does that work between a religious Jew and a religious Christian working together and teaching Bible?
Well, you could ask the same thing about a Christian and another Christian. There are about 50,000 different kinds of Christians, I understand. So once people understand, just because you are you, that doesn't mean that I cannot be me. Once we recognize, you know what, we can be friends even though we disagree about certain things. You know, I have a best friend, she's my wife. Guess what? We agree about things as well. So you're allowed to disagree, you're allowed to put things on the side, as long as there are things that we have in common. And amazingly, the majority of things that Orthodox Jews and pro-Israel Christians have in common, we agree upon. And so the things that we disagree upon, let's put it on the side for the duration of this engagement.
Judeo-Christian values are under attack around the world. How important is learning about the basis of these values in order to defend them?
Obviously, if you don't know about them, you cannot defend them. And the fact is that most people aren't on the defense for the bases of Jewish and Christian values. They're on the defense for Israel. But the real basis of Israel is the Bible and studying the Torah, studying the understanding of these bases of Jewish and Christian values. And that is what we talk about together. We start out by teaching the same kind of things that we would teach in a Jewish school, but after a while, the Christians understand that this is the kind of stuff that we actually can do together, and we do.
You have a new project coming out that's based on Kristallnacht. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's not so new. We've been doing this for about 3 years right now. It's called Light Up the Church. What happened was about 10 years ago, a Jewish woman from a kibbutz whose father was a Holocaust survivor. He was also a survivor of Kristallnacht, the night of destroyed glass, of broken glass in 1938. And she realized that the Germans, the Nazis, tried to put out the lights in synagogues on that night. And she said, we're going to keep the lights on in synagogues all around the world. So about 2-3 years ago, I found out about this project. I said, this is a perfect project for Christians so they can keep the lights on in their churches, in their homes, in their businesses for one night a year, on November 9th every year. And that way they can show that they are standing together with Jews all over the world.
Gidon, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
The most important thing that a Christian can do for the Jewish people and ultimately for himself is to have a relationship with a Jew. And that is why I offer you to go onto my website and to definitely reach out to me, and I will be happy to be your friend, your contact in Israel.
Thank you, Gidon, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, wishing you a happy Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah Sameach. Now back to the studio.
And now the truth from Zion.
Compared to other nations, Israel has long faced a disproportionate amount of international scrutiny and pressure, both politically and diplomatically. Israel has often been unfairly singled out by global institutions, media outlets, and political bodies. The United Nations, that was supposedly established to promote peace, diplomacy, and human rights, has often harbored an obsessive focus on Israel. Various UN bodies, especially the UN Human Rights Council, have been widely criticized for their singular attention regarding Israel's actions. Israel has been the subject of more resolutions, investigations, and condemnations than many of the world's worst human rights violators. Between 2015 and 2020, over 100 resolutions condemned Israel, while far fewer targeted nations engaged in significant atrocities. Countries like Syria, North Korea, and Iran, whose regimes have perpetrated massive human rights abuses, receive far less condemnation in comparison. A notable example is the UNHRC's creation of Agenda Item 7. It is a permanent item on the Council's agenda that specifically focuses on Israel's actions in Judea and Samaria. No other country has a permanent item dedicated to its conduct. This blatant imbalance contributes to a narrative in which Israel is disproportionately vilified on the global stage, despite its attempts to defend itself in an exceptionally hostile environment. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is another example of how Israel has been unfairly singled out. It seeks to apply economic, academic, and cultural pressure on Israel. Although framed as a peaceful protest for Palestinian rights, many critics see the BDS movement as being clearly discriminatory. Furthermore, the movement often conflates opposition to Israeli policies with a broader delegitimization of the Jewish state, revealing itself to be anti-Semitic. Similarly, Israeli cultural figures, including musicians, filmmakers, and artists, have been targeted by boycotts and protests at international events. Israel has also faced extraordinary pressure in the academic and cultural spheres. Universities, professional organizations, and cultural institutions around the world have increasingly become arenas for anti-Israel campaigns. Academic boycotts, which target Israeli universities, scholars, and researchers, aim to cut ties between Israeli institutions and their international counterparts. By targeting Israeli scholars and artists, these boycotts stifle academic freedom, cultural exchange, and dialogue that are essential for peace and mutual understanding. The media's portrayal of Israel has been another area where the country has been unfairly singled out. International news coverage of Israel is often imbalanced, presenting a one-sided narrative that paints Israel as the aggressor while downplaying the thousands of terror attacks against it. A key example of media bias can be found in the reporting of the war between Israel and Gaza. Israel's military operations in Gaza and Lebanon are subject to intense international scrutiny. However, other countries that engage in military operations in response to terrorist threats, such as the United States or Russia, are not held to the same level of accountability. When Israel responds to rocket fire from Hamas or other terrorist groups, headlines often focus on the casualties in Gaza, without providing sufficient context about the attacks on Israeli civilians that prompted the military response. Another way Israel is unfairly singled out is through the application of double standards in international law. The application of international law to Israel is often selective, with critics accusing Israel of committing war crimes or crimes against humanity. The International Criminal Court has singled out Israel for investigation while failing to address more egregious violations of international law by other nations. The diplomatic isolation is exacerbated by the fact that Israel is the only real democracy in a region dominated by authoritarian regimes. As a result, Israel is disproportionately criticized and isolated in international forums, even as it faces existential security threats from its neighbors. This singular focus on Israel, whether in the form of economic boycotts, media misrepresentation, or diplomatic isolation, undermines efforts for peace and mutual understanding, perpetuating a cycle of conflict and resentment.
International pressure against Israel is misguided. The pressure should be on the Islamic terror organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, as well as their puppet masters in Iran.
Ultimately, addressing these biases and ensuring a fair and balanced approach to Israel on the world stage is essential for fostering a more just and peaceful international order. Up next, the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Dear friends, I'm coming to you from the Gaza envelope, from Kibbutz Be'eri, the place that probably was worst hit by those atrocities of October 7. 10% of the population of this kibbutz were killed, mutilated, raped, and it was a day where the President of Israel said it was the darkest day in the history of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. What we saw on October 7 was not just a military conflict that was unfolding, but it was a vicious, demonic attack that targeted mainly civilians that were living here in this community. Kibbutz Be'eri was one of the most peaceful places in Israel. During most of the year, young families enjoyed living here and raising their children in that community. On October 7, everything was changed. Now, the Word of God tells us that the battle in which we are engaging, it is not a battle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers in the heavenly places. And what we have seen in Kibbutz Be'eri was a demonic manifestation of the spirit of Amalek. It was hitting people that were peace-loving residents of this community, like the following story.
כן, הבית הזה גרה פה ויויאן, שהייתה פעילת שלום, שבאה מקנדה, אין יותר ממנה, הייתה מסיעה, אנשים עד לעזה, היו אוכלים אצלה, שותים, ופה היא מצאה את מותה. פשוט מאוד שרפו לה את הבית ורצחו אותה. ומה שאני אומר, חמאס, דאעש, נאצים, הם לא בוחלים, אין חברים. הם רוצים להרוג את כל היהודים ואת כל הנוצרים בעולם, זה האמונה שלהם וזה מה שהם רוצים.
What you hear here, it's a rebirth of the spirit of Amalek in our time. I don't think this spirit of Amalek, of hating the Jews, wanting to annihilate the Jewish people, were more powerful manifested than on October 7. I want to call upon our prayer partners from around the world to understand, even though you see the physical destruction of that house, we are not waging a physical war. Our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against demonic powers that are operating over there in Gaza with organizations like Hamas, like Islamic Jihad, that have one target: to annihilate the Jewish people. This spirit needs to be addressed in prayer. We need you to speak out to your communities about the atrocities that were taking place here in this land. And it's a time where the church needs to wake up, where they need to stand up. Not only confessions are enough today, where we say we love Israel, but actions are needed. Vivian's story showed us that this is indeed a demonic force that was unleashed, that is operating still inside Gaza today. Israel needs to deal with that, of course, in a military means, but we need Christians around the world who are facing that challenge of Amalek, of anti-Semitism, of Jew hatred that is operating there, not only here in this region of the Middle East, but it is seen also today on the streets of Europe and the streets even of America, and even on some of the most liberal campuses in the world. Today we need to pray for Israel like never before. I'm reminded in these days on the story of Exodus chapter 17, on the story of Amalek as they viciously attacked the Jewish people. It was a spiritual battle that on the one side it was fought on the ground with Joshua and his army. At the same time, Moses and Aaron and Hur were on the mountain praying and interceding for the people of Israel. I want to tell you that this is the day when the church needs to stand with Israel, like Moses, like Aaron, like her, on the mountain to pray for a clear victory of Israel against those forces of darkness. Today, a praying church is being needed around the world. Please join our various prayer initiatives, either the global prayer gathering, the Rosh Chodesh prayer, 24/7 campaign. Israel needs today your prayer more than ever. Thank you so much for standing with us, and I look forward to see you and to welcome you in one of our prayer meetings. God bless you here from the envelope of Gaza.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Robert.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.